None of us know exactly what to do in the face of uncertainty. And sometimes crises are predictable. You can anticipate stages of life and crises. The crisis we're in right now, nobody would have predicted. In fact, it's fascinating to go back. It was about 8 days ago, the NBA season was canceled. You got to be kidding me. I mean, it was a month ago that Trump's impeachment in America was the number one issue. No one could have predicted this. No one could have predicted this. And so, one of the issues in a crisis is learning to respond in a situation where we have no predictability. And I think that's what we're in. This accident happened. It's nobody's fault. It's not worth spending time blaming and criticizing. You did this, you did that. You got to move forward. You got to react. But leading in a crisis is so critical for a couple of reasons. When we're in a crisis, and assume the following metaphor: you're driving down the road. My son-in-law is a doctor, our son-in-law. He's driving down the road. In front of him, a serious accident occurs. And there's somebody who's physically injured. What does Chris do, our son-in-law? He jumps out of his car and he does first mover triage. He stops the bleeding. He checks the person. He makes sure they're okay. That's what leaders are now doing. This is reaction. You're getting your employees to work at home. You're managing some quick cost ideas. You're trying to instill confidence with your customers so you don't lose them. You're doing that quick reaction work that is simply, what's going on today? How do I contain this problem that I'm facing? And I think that's what leaders have to start with in a crisis. I think the metaphor of an ambulance is fascinating. So in a crisis, we get help. We're not standing alone. We're standing with others. We don't have to be all alone out there trying to fix the individual who's in crisis. The ambulance comes. What happens in that ambulance? Enormous empathy. You're okay. I mean, I can just see the caregiver. I'm laying in the ambulance, hurting and in pain. You're okay. You're okay. You're in good hands. We know what we're doing. Also in that ambulance, you do some diagnosis. Okay, why are you bleeding? Is this an internal bleed? Is this a superficial bleed? You can't always do that in this immediacy of crisis. But now that you're in the ambulance transitioning to the hospital, what's going on? And I think now, as we see maybe the next steps in this pandemic in the world, most companies have worked through some of the crisis. We know that you work at home by finding a private space, by not worrying about messy hair, letting phones ring and dogs bark and all that stuff. We know how to work at home and get over that. Now I think we've got to begin to think as leaders about, we're okay. We're still here. We're still here. Diagnosis then. What's the deeper issue? What's going on that we've got to look at? It's not just working at home to work at home. It's working at home so that we continue to build a company that wins. And one of the things we've learned about that is navigating paradox. You got to care for the person in the organization, and you've got to create a competitive enterprise. I think leaders have the gift and art of navigating through that inherent tension. And our job as leaders is to say, there are times to care. You're okay. There are times to be competitive. There is a crisis here. You're bleeding too much. I'm going to navigate that in this crisis. So phase one is just take care of the folks on the side of the road, do the reaction, make it happen, contain. Phase two, empathy, paradox, diagnosis, as we're in that transitory phase. And I hope that's where we begin to see this global pandemic starting to head.